Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Leah Wiley, and I'm the Training and Events Coordinator here at Eco Canada. Welcome to today's webinar, Empowering Indigenous Communities, Introducing the Energy Code Compliance, Monitoring, and Enforcement Toolkit, Part 1. Before we start, I would like to take a moment to recognize the traditional Indigenous lands where Eco Canada's office is based in Calgary. Eco Canada's commitment to reconciliation starts with acknowledging our honor and privilege to live and work within the Treaty 7 territory. Eco Canada acknowledges the traditional territories and oral practices of the Niitsitapi, home of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations. We also acknowledge the Tsuut'ina and Stoney Nakoda, which include Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. In addition, the city of Calgary is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta. I also want to go over a few housekeeping guidelines for today's session to ensure that everyone can enjoy and participate in our session effectively. All participants are muted. If you are experiencing any technical issues, please use the chat function on the side of your screen, and we will do our best to help. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing in 24 hours. Any questions you have about the presentation or today's topic can be submitted through the question box, and we will have dedicated time at the end of the presentation to answer any questions from the audience. And now I would like to pass it on to our speaker from Simplify Energy, Adam Trovato. I'll just give you the sharing. On to you, Adam.
Awesome, thank you. Fantastic. Okay, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining me today. As Leah mentioned, my name is Adam Trovato, and I am one of the principals of Simplify Energy Consultants. And today we'll be presenting on the Energy Code Compliance, Monitoring, and Enforcement Toolkit that Simplify Energy, Decarb Inc., and Eco Canada developed together. It was a really fun project, and we're really proud of the toolkit and excited to share it with you all. Okay, so my portion of today's webinar should run about 45 minutes. I'll do my best to not go over and leave some time for questions at the end. If you do have any questions, please just put them in the chat box and we will address them at the end. So, but yeah, in terms of the agenda today, the PowerPoint itself will probably only be about 5 to 10 minutes before we jump into the toolkit itself and go more hands-on. We'll start off with a brief introduction of myself and the project, jump into a toolkit overview, and then dive into the main uses and functionalities of the toolkit, and go into it hands-on and take you through sort of the 500 pages as efficiently as possible. So yeah, let's dive in. Okay, so as some of you may know, my name is Adam. I'm a principal at Simplify Energy, as I mentioned, and I'm a certified energy manager and technologist. At Simplify Energy, we're energy efficiency and sustainability consultants who work to provide building owners guidance on how to save money on utilities, reduce the environmental impact of their buildings, and to make their building portfolios more efficient, higher performing, and align more with broader organizational and environmental goals. We provide energy audits, community energy plans, energy modeling, renewable energy analysis, funding support, and all that fun stuff, and have been lucky enough to develop over $50 million of energy efficiency projects in consulting, construction, and program delivery specific to Indigenous communities. So I'm lucky enough to have a pretty good level of experience working with various Indigenous communities throughout the country, and working to, align their community goals and building goals and environmental goals to try and build projects that build sustainable and healthy buildings. So it's something that I'm very passionate about and I'm happy to be speaking about today. Um, I guess linked to that, I've worked with over 30 communities throughout Canada, and I'm currently on a project within Alberta where we're looking at over 300 Indigenous owned buildings in Alberta. So we were able to glean off lots of those insights to provide something hopefully very relevant and practical for communities. Okay, yeah, honestly, that's enough about me. So let's dive into the building code itself. So in terms of a project background, just to give you some context, in November 2024, Eco Canada reached out looking for the development of a lasting toolkit for Indigenous communities that both introduces the National Building Code and the National Energy Code, but also goes into, explaining the code in depth, providing tools for communities to increase adoption of code, educate users on building science and energy literacy, and honestly provide case studies and examples that communities can look to provide inspiration and guidance on their projects. So Simplify Energy and Decarb Inc. partnered up to develop this toolkit. And I'd like to, just before I dive into this, acknowledge the actual leader of this project, Ward Woolgar from Decarb Inc., who worked tirelessly on this project. I think by the end of this, we had over 80 revisions or 80 versions of the toolkit. And I think his dedication on this project is something that you'll see throughout the toolkit overview, and is something that I'm just really wanted to acknowledge, as I don't want to take credit for all of his great work. I'd also like to thank the folks at Eco Canada for all their work steering this project and helping provide great feedback throughout. I think this is going to be a really useful tool for communities. Okay, so as you can see from the top chapter titles on the screen, the toolkit covers a large range of topics with a central focus on National Building Code, NECB, and general building science and energy efficiency content. So, I'm not going to go through each of these bullets now because we're going to go into each chapter at least briefly throughout the overview, but it is worth just showing kind of the overall cadence of the project and all the different types of things that the toolkit touches on. Another screenshot just of the 2 chapters here of the table of contents. As you can see, a very robust document, very detailed, and is something that can be taken from the communities and digested in smaller pieces. So if there's specific subjects that you'd like to learn about, it's more than likely that they're within these in the toolkit. So you don't have to necessarily take all 500 pages and read it at once, but there might be 4 pages that are relevant to you on, concrete finishing or wooden stairs or something like that. And you can go into the toolkit and educate yourself about it. Okay, so before we dive into the actual toolkit itself, I wanted to highlight what we deem as the major uses and functionalities of the toolkit. For starters, the toolkit is meant for all people within an Indigenous community, but particularly for those in leadership positions and decision-making positions. So that tends to be around, directors who are making decisions around buildings, policy, and community development. That can be the chief and council, directors of public works, housing, infrastructure, those types of things. But it's also useful for those who want to learn more about building science, energy, building policy, and thus it could be used for a pretty wide range of community members. The content itself is meant to provide education to staff about building code and help communities understand the value proposition of actually adopting building code. And then if they were to adopt building code, how to enforce it and maintain it and make sure that that system is built out in a comprehensive and thoughtful way. It's as well meant to provide construction and building knowledge that will better support new builds as well as energy retrofits and building renovations. Every community I've ever been in does have construction going on at some point or another. Buildings are going up, houses are going up, things are getting renovated. And it's important that these are done in a thoughtful way that aligns as best with some best practices as best as possible. And of course, this is linked to providing broader community literacy around buildings and energy, as the toolkit has significant resources that educate building owners and, just renters, anyone about, construction, maintenance, and topics like that. And finally, the toolkit will support community knowledge to ensure that buildings are built and maintained in a safe way with breathable air, safe structures, and are just a safe place for us to live, work, play in. So, okay, sweet. Now we will dive in. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of my dog that's that good, but um, here is the toolkit itself. Give me 1 second to pull up some notes here. Okay, perfect. So I'm hoping that this is um, a good level of zoom. This allows the screen to show everything. So hopefully this is big enough. So because this is a 500 page document, as you can see, 490 pages here at the top, um, I thought it would be more useful to flip through the different sections and go into a little bit of depth into the most relevant and interesting sections of the toolkit. Um, I'll do my best to not go too rapidly flipping through the content, but please bear with me because there is, as you can see, 490 pages, um, and we won't be able to go through nearly the whole thing. There is a second session in 2 weeks, and it's not meant to be the exact same session. It's meant to go into more depth into some of the most relevant sections. So if you want to learn more following this, please sign up for that session where we'll actually be going into quite a bit more depth into the actual energy code and complying and things like that. So okay, so getting into it, as you can see, the table of contents is very detailed, and it's structured in a way that has, chapters, sections, and subsections. And you'll see that the users of the toolkit can pinpoint specific areas that they're working on and target learning specific to this. So if I wanted to, for example, learn about um, wooden stairs, I could go into the table of contents here and see that on page 120 is wooden stairs. So I'd go, I know that I'm starting a bit ahead. So go there. Here I am for the wooden stairs. And you can see here that we have several pages in the what's under the roof section on wooden stairs where you can learn about, all sorts of different details. I'm not going to go into, this isn't a wooden stairs webinar, so I'm not going to go too much into detail here, but you can see that there's quite a bit of detail here on wooden stairs. And, that kind of goes with what you'll see throughout the toolkit with many other sections of it. But I just wanted to show sort of the table of contents, how you could go in and select a specific set of content and then go target that. Okay, so now that I've kind of shown you all the brilliant way that the table of content works, I will go into the chapters. So chapter 1, building a foundation for Indigenous communities is, you can see here, that we've got the QR code. So you can actually click in and get the energy code, so which is useful. So you can go in, click into that. But I'm not going to pull this up because it'll probably make the video lag, but it's a 1,500 page document. So we didn't provide all of, these as appendix items, or else this thing would have been 10,000 pages with all the code stuff that we're referencing. But so further into the chapter, as we flip through, you can see links to the building, fire, plumbing, energy, and farm code of Canada, which provide clear access to the real documents when a community member wants to read the detailed text or wants to reference the actual text. So you can see these documents here all exist. all just quickly accessible and digestible at the start of the document. Um, as well, you can see as we flip through this chapter, that we have significant relevant information about building code, as well as cultural specific case studies that highlight interesting concepts about the building code. So let's see, if you go here to page 28, this is one of my favorite examples. This is a specific feature on how to ensure smudging ceremonies can occur inside a building and remain code compliant. So the building code does have these things in it, and we provide all the details required to align with building code and not lapse code or violate it, which includes temporary pauses to the fire alarm and assigning designated smudging areas. So you can see here, we've got a little write-up about it, and then the steps to conduct smudge ceremonies safely and code compliant. So you just see several steps here, which, as you can see, involves optimizing your HVAC system, engaging with owners, designating these smudging areas, and so on and so forth. So I thought a pretty interesting section there. As we flip through further, we go into why building codes are essential, which includes information on safety, health, comfort, energy efficiency, and all that fun stuff. So, once again, another feature on improving air quality in First Nation homes. We know that a lot of communities have wood-fired heating systems and things like that that create substandard breathing conditions. So some more information on that. And then you can see here, if I flip to this page, that there's a detailed description of the roles and responsibilities of different governmental jurisdictions and their role in building code, which then goes directly into some of the distinct challenges that Indigenous communities have to manage. So super relevant and useful information for people who are trying to learn about the building code, where they fit into it, and just the introductory knowledge there. Okay, going into chapter 2, we get more into the weeds of the actual building code of Canada. So within this chapter, you'll learn more about the code and the many justifications for it existing, and the many components of building code, which, as you can see here, includes structural safety. Here we go. Structural safety, fire safety, plumbing, electrical systems, mechanical systems, energy efficiency, accessibility, and the chapter then does finish up with a detailed analysis of the role of the federal, provincial, and municipal governments in enforcing the building code, as well as their specific mechanisms to ensure that buildings are built to code, including building permits, site inspections, enforcement actions, and things of that likeness. So you can see the role of municipalities here. As if any people have lived in cities, we know how you go and get a building permit from the city. So it's about setting up a lot of these systems internally, and then setting up some of the revenue streams and things like that to ensure that the system can maintain itself. Okay. So on to chapter 3. Excuse me, I'm just going to have a quick sip of water. So chapter 3, this provides detailed insights into the National Energy Code of Canada, which you've probably already heard me refer to as NECB. That's what I'm referring to when I say NECB. I probably should have said that earlier. My apologies. As the name indicates, the NECB is primarily focused on buildings being built to a certain level of energy performance. And this has a large impact on ensuring our buildings are built in a way that's less environmentally damaging as older buildings and have a higher energy performance, resulting in lower energy costs and operating costs, and often is synonymous with a higher performing building as well. As you can see here, I'm just going to flip ahead. Um, you can see here the focus area of NECB involves the components of a building that tend to impact energy the most. So that includes the building envelope. Um, for those of you who aren't familiar with what a building envelope is, that's generally the outside of the building, the things that interact with the outside. So your roof, your windows, your exterior walls, your doors. So we see in a lot of buildings throughout the country, Indigenous or not, that the building envelopes are large areas for poor energy performance, but also poor building performance, leaky buildings, leaks that then create moisture infiltration, that then create mold, that then create poor breathing conditions, that create people getting sick. Like these are the importance of a building envelope is very paramount. Um, as well, we're going to go into NECB looks at lighting, mechanical systems, water heating, and so on. So you can see all of these things. And then they do have an integrated impact. All the systems interact. Obviously, if you have an airtight building envelope, it's less critical. Um, or sorry, I won't say that. But if you have an airtight building envelope, you'll need less capacity, heating capacity, than if you have a very leaky building envelope. So these systems interact. In fact, even some lights, older lights, give off heat. So if you replace an old incandescent bulb with an LED bulb, you actually do technically need to marginally increase your heating output. So all of these things get looked at and addressed in the NECB. Following this section of the report, we explain the difference between the different compliance sorry, can't get my tongue. Compliance paths. So you can see that there's prescriptive, trade-off, and performance. Um, you might hear a lot about that when you're going through learning about NECB. So I'll go into a little bit of an explanation there. The prescriptive path is the most simple and requires builders to basically build each building component to a minimum standard. Very little flexibility to this approach, but very easy to comply with. It also has less layers of costs, which I'll get into later. The trade-off path allows certain trade-offs between the performance of building components in order to allow for more flexibility in other areas, as long as the total building performance is achieved between the interconnected components. So I know that's a bit of a wordful, but for example, a building may be allowed to put in a lower efficiency window if it installs a geothermal system or a high efficiency HVAC system that allows the total building performance to remain ahead of the standard. The third option is the performance path. That's when folks like me tend to get involved most because it does require a detailed energy model. Um, so this provides the most room for innovation and freedom of design, and also allows for building components to be specified in a more flexible energy standard as long as the total performance is achieved. So to validate this, like I said, an energy modeler like myself would come in and model the building design and then tell you the output. Um, and then that would be the modeling output of the building. So as you can see here, there are different tiers for NECB. There's the baseline compliance, there's the intermediate efficiency, the advanced efficiency, and net zero ready performance. Each of these tiers has a different level of energy performance associated with it. And it's implied that the construction cost for the first tier will generally be the lowest, but will have the highest operating cost. And then the fourth tier will have the lowest operating cost and likely the highest construction cost. And that's just because, generally speaking, building more efficient, building with integrated renewables will increase the cost, the construction cost and the design cost a slight amount, but then will drastically lower the operating costs. Obviously, that's a wide generality. There's going to be exceptions to that, of course. Overall, I would say that this chapter is a great chapter to introduce you to the NECB as a whole and to help introduce the different pathways, tiers, and the cost benefit to each of them. So it's a good idea for someone to understand kind of where they want to, what path they want to take, and then how far to take it if they do go down that performance path. Okay, I'm going to jump ahead to chapter 4, which is one of the smallest chapters, and it's focused on building safe, sustainable, and culturally resilient community buildings and communities. This chapter delves into how Indigenous communities are leveraging the building code, uh, an energy code, to build structures that are safe, sustainable, and culturally meaningful. If you go through this chapter, you'll see it's largely filled with real world examples, case studies, and data to display the large impact that building codes can make for a community and their buildings. So it's very much relevant stories and examples, anecdotes, case studies. So you'll see features on things like the Six Nations School Project. You'll see, where was the one I was pretty interested in? This one, the Tobique First Nations housing success story. So lots of interesting little tidbits that you can draw on and apply to your community, or think, oh, part of that is cool, part of that would work, but we're way further north. We would need to make these tweaks. But it really is a cool project to take really great examples from around the country that we wanted to highlight and show, because a lot of communities are doing fantastic projects and are building up their community in really cool ways. Like, I think that, I believe it was the Six Nations project. By the end of it, a really large percentage of the, yeah, 80% of one school and 70% of the other school were built by members of the Six Nations band. So it talks about things like integrating workforce and things like that. So it's a really neat chapter, and something that provides a lot of real world examples that are pretty inspiring. Okay. Chapter 5, navigating the building code. This chapter is super technical. Probably won't go into a ton of detail right now, just because of where things are at. But the chapter is very technical and goes into lots of detail on the building, uh, fire code, and plumbing code. So as mentioned, you can go straight to these codes themselves, but then the high level information is provided here. Once again, we try and weave all of these with some interesting case studies, and just make sure that even in our more dry chapters, there's a few interesting little tidbits that you can grab, from. And yeah, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention we tried to keep the content kind of fresh from a reader's perspective. So there's key concepts, fast facts, things like that throughout, that are super, maybe to a nerd like me, are super interesting. But yeah, overall, this chapter is pretty brief and pretty technical. Chapter 6, as you can see, is for housing in small buildings in its National Building Code of Canada. So this goes into detail on housing in small buildings and provides the most technical and building learning abilities probably within the toolkit. There are a couple sections that go into a lot of depth into actual buildings. So I think these chapters in particular could be just widely relevant to people in the community who are involved or interested in construction. Okay, so the chapter starts out by reviewing building materials, systems, and equipment, and then goes right into the what's under the roof section of the toolkit, which provides significant details on, education and building systems. So you can see some definitions here, and then we get into what's under the roof. So you can see um, there's a pretty significant section on exterior wall framing, then goes into the details on, foundation, glass, stairs, window insulation. Um, right, so I can't go in, I wish I could go into all of these. I'm probably behind schedule already in this webinar, but there's tons of content in here and it's super useful, super handy stuff to learn about and just starts suggesting, best practices and things like that to avoid certain issues that we're seeing in our building. Like for example, right here, minimizing condensation. And we've got diagrams, key concepts, installation guidelines, material standards. So lots of juice, lots of information there. As you flip through it, you really will find a wealth of information, and it includes everything from like how to install a floor effectively to flashing for water resistance to cladding. So not purely about energy and solar and HVAC here, very much practical for general building construction. And if I start talking to you about how to build things, we'll all be building things poorly because I'm no handyman. So best that I don't talk too much about how to build stairs. Okay, so this is a super long section. So you'll see I'm just going to rip through just to show you kind of the amount of content here. If you want to learn about framing, load bearing spans, and structural support, framing openings, right? Like these, it really is a wealth of information that I think as we put it together, we all ended up learning a lot about different building systems. So super handy, and I suggest anyone who's kind of in the housing field kind of dive into this and start trying to implement some of these practices as best they can. Okay, longest chapter ever. Okay, there we go. So on to chapter 7, navigating the National Building Code, a practical example. So this is a short chapter, only about 10 pages, where we go into detail on an example of navigating the building code for details on roofs. So very much a practical example. Let's dive in here. Perhaps you're reviewing a roof and have a question about its construction. So we take you through all that. Good stuff there. Takes you to the section. Once again, I wish I could go more into details about this, but this is a fun exercise to do about actually learning how to navigate the code and using a practical example to say, okay, what information am I looking for? How would I go and find it? Where would I find it? And whatnot. So the goal here is to show you the vast amount of detail that the code has and to show you how to navigate a particular section to get the details required for your project. You can see here, where is it? Yeah, that there are minimum and maximum slope amounts associated with different types of roofing. So, for example, asphalt shingles in a normal application have a minimum slope of 1 and 3, and they don't have a maximum slope. The chapter includes more examples around flashing and other roofing details, but is meant to show you how to navigate the code for different building components. Fun stuff. Okay, only a couple more chapters left. So chapter 8, a guide to navigating the NECB. This chapter is like the last, but focused on the energy code. This chapter starts with an overview of the structure of NECB. As you can see here, you can dive right into the NECB again. And the NECB has 3 different divisions. So there's division A, compliance objectives and functional statements. Division B, acceptable solutions. You'll see within this section that there's a significant amount of detail on technical building details, such as building envelope components, thermal characteristics, fenestration, and other things like air leakage as well. Okay, now this is a long section, so I'm just going to jump ahead to, where is that? The third, or the division C, I guess the third division is administrative provisions, which very quickly reviews the administrative provisions of NECB. So you can see that that's very quick little wrap up compared to the last division, which had 8.4 parts to it. Okay, Chapter 9, Housing in Small Buildings, Introduction to NECB for Small Buildings. This section is a lot of text and information regarding the NECB and the technical building information about the various parts of a building. So you'll see when I flip through this chapter that there's information on building envelope, heating systems, surface water heating, and other building components. And it provides a hands-on calculation education on how to make certain calculations for the code. So let me just kind of flip through this one. Let me see, where is that? So minimum thermal requirements, specialty requirements, HVAC requirements. So it starts with the scope and application, equipment and ducts. There's some information on sizing design. So this is a pretty technical, hands-on section of the NECB that we'll probably go more into depth on in the next webinar. Okay. Bear with me as I get to this next chapter. Thank you. Okay, so Chapter 10, Pathway to Self-Governance and Adopting Land Codes. It's a pretty sweet chapter, in my opinion, and provides just a wide range of content, and it becomes a very educational and also practical section of the toolkit. So this section begins by describing the context of lands codes within Indigenous communities by stating that in First Nation communities, the regulation of land use and construction practices operates within a unique legal framework originally governed by the Indian Act. This legislation provided the foundational authority for land management on reserves, granting First Nations the power to create bylaws to regulate community aspects, including the building and construction standards. So that was a direct quote. This section goes into the detail of the evolution of the First Nations land management, which begins with the First Nations Land Management Act in 1999 and transitioned into the Framework Agreement on First Nation Land Management Act in 2022. As you can see here in the image below, I'm going to zoom in a bit on this, that First Nations possess significantly more authority over their buildings than a typical municipality, and thus are at parallel to the federal government in this. So Indigenous communities are in a very unique position to have, sovereignty over their buildings and control over their buildings. But there's also a lot of best practices that are put in place that the communities might be best served to consider adopting under their own system, essentially. So this chapter goes into, I'm just going to zoom this out, goes into that detail, basically. And we go on to explore the First Nation Land Code, which has several parts, including fundamental rights, definitions and interpretation, lands, land and natural resources administration, First Nation legislation, lands, meetings, and votes, protection of land, conflicts of interest, financial management and accountability, interests and license in land, dispute resolution, and other matters. So to support this, like I said, I think this is a pretty useful section. We developed a checklist on navigating success and adopting the land code. So you can see here that there's a checklist for nations adopting a land code. So actions to take, this goes into engagement with the community, understanding the legal frameworks, actual development of a comprehensive code, collaboration with experts. It's a comprehensive list of actions to take that can ensure that things aren't getting missed. And then there's also mistakes to avoid. And, there's been certain processes that have taken place throughout history of time that we want to avoid. And that, from not engaging the community to, disregarding transparency, ignoring the cultural context and the fact that all communities are different. So we really did try and provide tools as well here to make these things easier to use and to implement on your communities. So finally, actually, one thing I thought this was useful. There's often a lot of questions, same questions that we get, even the same questions that I was having that I figured, we could put in here. So we put some FAQs. We have this in a few sections, just about, frequently asked questions that tend to be pretty educational because they're just the typical questions that we have. So we've got quite a few of those, which in my opinion is actually one of the most educational places on this. Okay, now finally, this is the last sort of major chapter. This is exercising authority of jurisdiction in First Nation communities. So this section outlines the authority of jurisdiction that First Nation governments possess within Canada. This authority gives Chief and Council the authority to establish, enforce, and maintain building codes and regulations, and includes the power of creating bylaws, implementing a permit system, and overseeing developments. And this is, obviously a critical process in both regulatory oversight, but also reinforcing self-governance. So go into that, establishing a building governance, foundational requirements, things like that. So the remainder of the chapter goes through the role of zoning bylaws in land use and community planning, goes through how to create a bylaw, which we can see, I think we got a couple pages here. Yeah, creating and implementing a bylaw, step-by-step framework. So to me, this is also very useful. It starts with identifying the need for a bylaw, performing research and analysis, jurisdictional scans, looking at other communities, other municipalities, how they manage these things, performing community and stakeholder consultation and engagement, a drafting of the bylaw, getting it reviewed, vetted, and then eventually approved, community education on these things, and enforcement and monitoring, followed by reviewing and updating the bylaw. And yeah, as these things, bylaws, laws, they've been passed in most communities, I would imagine. And this is a pretty systematic process to get that done from a building perspective. Okay, so later, that's I think right here, perfect. There's a section on enforcing building codes in Indigenous communities, which suggests the steps of establishing a legal authority, implementing a permitting system, conducting inspections and compliance monitoring, enforcement of the bylaw, capacity building and training, community education, and funding the enforcement system, which is typically done through a combination of fines, fees, and grants. So this is pretty much, so you can see here, example for a building permit application, conducting the inspections, enforcing compliance, capacity building, community education, and then once again, ensuring success, actions to take. So another section here on actions to take, and then common pitfalls to avoid. And then we do have FAQs on the bylaws and building permits as well. Okay, so finally, chapter 12, which is the references, and 13, which is the printable sheets. So references, pretty simple here, just a bunch of QR codes, things to reference. There is a lot of good stuff in here if you want to dig in. Yeah, tons of useful information. We think that we've provided 490 useful pages, but if you feel like that's not enough, we've got thousands and thousands of pages within these QR codes to dig into. And then 13 printable sheets. You can see here that for educational purposes, there's sort of a wealth of useful things that communities can take and either for example, building permit applications and forms, or more detailed educational components of the toolkit. So if you did want to just take some of these things out and give it to housing or something like that, these would be useful printouts that are full pages, easier to look at, things like that. So you can see here that we've got about 60 pages of these full printouts, and this is just meant to allow the community to more easily access robust documentation on this stuff. So, okay, I think that's more or less the overview of the toolkit. I think this is sort of the time I wanted to wrap up this in case we had any questions or anything of the sort. Obviously, I wasn't able to go into full detail of each component of the toolkit, and I hope it wasn't too dry or hectic me flipping through it all. But I wanted to show you the architecture of the document, hopefully entice you to try and get the document. The information that's available within it is super useful, even if there's only bits and pieces that you think are useful right now. That's still a big win for us if we can help you with one or two things, even if it's how you want to install Windows in your community. So obviously the point of this is to show the value of considering the implementation of building code and energy code, and to show you that it is typically a positive driver in these communities that do take it on. In terms of next steps, the Eco Canada folks would love you to reach out to them if you'd like to join the program and receive a toolkit. So please, reach out to them. You can. I'm going to share my info here. My information is here. If you ever want to contact me about the toolkit or about any of this stuff, I'm happy to chat about it. And yeah, overall, I hope you enjoyed the time here today, and would be happy to take any questions from you.
Great, thank you so much, Adam. That was a great presentation. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, just type them into the question box. I'll read them out to Adam. We have a few questions already, so I can start with those. Here, first question. Has this toolkit been released yet, and where can someone get a copy?
It will be available soon online.
Oh, Adam, I think you're muted.
My mistake. Um, yeah, the toolkit, um, it's owned by Eco Canada. They're piloting it right now, so please reach out to Pooja at Eco Canada. Um, Maybe if someone
Sure.
from Eco Canada could share some emails, that would probably be the most useful way of
Yeah, for sure. I'll
proceeding.
put the Pooja's email in the chat here. Just a minute.
But yeah, the toolkit is complete. So just working with Eco Canada to join that program and get the toolkit.
Okay, yeah, while I get those emails, I'll just go ahead with the next question here. So, are there resources to help assist First Nations through this process? So, people, resources, yeah.
Yeah, yes, I think Eco Canada is there, and that's part of this broader program. And then there are folks like myself and other building consultants who can definitely support with this. So I think as a first starting point, it's probably good to reach out to Eco Canada and explore what this program has to offer. And then they have a set of experts that they can help with as well.
Okay, awesome. One more question here. Can clarification be made on the purpose of including information on self-government and land code?
That was educational would be the purpose of it, to provide broader context into just how who has authorities and what type of opportunities the communities have. So was meant to just provide education on it rather than to imply any specific sort of action needed to be taken.
Okay, awesome. The next question here, I can answer this. Will the presentation be available to revisit at a later date? So the answer is yes. This has been recorded. It should be ready to share in about 24 hours. I'll put the email address that you can reach out to request the recording. It's just events@eco.ca. I'll put that in the chat. Here we go. Another question here. Is there funding available to move through the process? That might be a question for somebody else, but
I can provide some information. So Eco Canada's program, I think, provides some support for this, but there are programs out there that do provide support for Indigenous communities or any municipalities under 30,000 people, which I would imagine most communities do fit under that number. Um, there's it's called the Climate. Give me one second, actually, because uh, the Climate Ready Infrastructure Service, climatereadycanada.com. That's a program that provides, like I said, communities under 30,000 people, which are deemed lower capacity just based on their population, funding to explore and implement infrastructure uh, infrastructure projects that are for advancing environmental and climate resiliency. So this would fit under that. This program covers a wide range of projects. So you could do a renewable energy feasibility study, or something like what we've talked about, implementing building code. But that is a resource that communities can look to potentially access funding.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
I don't know if I'm able to do that. There we go. Perfect.
I think that's all the questions we have for now. So if anything else comes up, again, you can email Adam or events@eco.ca. Somebody has a question here. If you have any more questions, just type them into the question box and we can quickly answer them right now. If not, like I said, just send us an email and we'll be happy to get back to you as soon as possible. And the email again is events@eco.ca. That's the easiest one for any questions. Oops, sorry, here. That's events with an S. Sorry about that. There we go. It's in the chat there if anyone didn't see it. Just, oh, and the Pooja, P Sharma@eco.ca. That is Pooja Sharma. She works at Eco Canada as well. You can also email her if you have any questions.
And I just, here, I'll just in case, I'm just going to do something quickly here. Just in case anyone can't see the chat box, I will share that. So these are the best emails to contact. Events for the copy of the presentation, and Pooja for the more information on the program and access to the toolkit.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Adam.
No problem. Okay, well, perfect timing, right at 12.
That's great. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And thanks again, Adam, for this very informative presentation. And I hope everyone has a great day.
See everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.